All righty. All righty. Well, welcome to our inaugural Wednesday Night Alive in the Commons event. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Kelly Keller, and I'm the director of the Center for Faith Studies, and I work with Chris on adult ed activities as well. I want to mention Terry Vincent. She is our Converging Paths Ministries director. Did I get that right? Close enough. Which to us means she's actually working at encouraging the small group ministry. And so if you are not in a small group, we're in a small group and want to be in a small group, she is definitely the person to talk to, and we encourage that at all times. So without further ado, and I also want to thank our baristas, Jeremy Waddens and Dan Hackett. Thank you very much. And Ed Haddell is walking around here. There he is. He's not even walking. Ed is the one that is helping with setup, so thank you. Yay. All righty. So without further ado, what I want to do is introduce our speaker this evening. Tunette Powell is the director of the Truth Heals Foundation here in Omaha. She wears a lot of hats and has so many talents, it would be difficult to begin to list them. Actually, it's actually very mind-boggling how many different ways that she's involved in the community, from helping out in the Omaha Street School, working with kids, working actually on mentoring teachers, on becoming better teachers. She's just an amazing force to be reckoned with in the community. But tonight, she will be speaking on a topic towards justice in the classroom. This is a topic that is near and dear to her, and I'll let her tell her story. But suffice it to say, she's been interviewed on CNN. She's been with the Washington Post and Huffington Post and NPR on this topic. And so she has been out telling the story and raising awareness, and she's blessing us tonight with her story. So please welcome Tunette Powell.
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here and to talk about this topic. I know a lot of times we might think, well, I'm not an educator, so what does this have to do with me? I'm going to give you a statistic, and I really want you guys to think about this. When you look at preschool all across America, African American youth, children, make up 18%, yet they make up for 43% of all of the preschool suspensions. Now, when I say that, you should probably be baffled that we have preschool suspensions in the first place. But we do, and it's happening all across the country. And just to give you a little bit about me that was not in my introduction, when I was 3 years old, I was expelled from preschool. It wasn't because I did something violent. It was because they said that I talked too much, and I thought I was grown. And here I am talking to you all. But that was, even though that was real for me, I believed in what the system told me. The system says if you work hard enough, you can make it. If you grow up in a two-parent home and you are in a middle-class income or better and you're doing well for yourself, these type of things won't happen. And so when I was here to speak last year, I talked about how I grew up. And the system told me that, growing up with a father addicted to drugs, that was the reason why that happened to you. And growing up with a mother without a college education, that was the reason why that happened to you. Until last year, when I got a phone call that both of my boys were being suspended. And I thought to myself, what happened? The educational system, the system that we're all, a product of, told me that if my kids grew up in this loving two-parent home, and they do, that if they grew up in this beautiful home, and we have a 4-bedroom home, that none of this would happen if we took them to church and we did all those great things with them, spent a lot of time with them, had them reading early, all of these things, this would have never happened. And so on one hand, you could have said, well, maybe your kids were bad. And that's initially what I thought. I was bad kind of when I was a little bit, when I was small and I was young. So I thought maybe somehow those teachers know about my history. Maybe they knew that I was, suspended all the time and expelled. So maybe that carried with them. Until I went to a birthday party with a lot of friends. And my kids, they don't go to a very diverse preschool program. So when we went to that program, to that party, they were all white teachers. all white parents. And we started talking about how school was going and everything. And then it got to a conversation about, my son, one of my son's classroom. And I said, JJ, who's now 6, he's been getting suspended. And all the parents said, what? Suspended? And at that point, I never thought anything, that it never had anything to do with anything except for I wasn't a good parent and my boys just weren't very good boys. And so they said, well, I wonder what it takes to get suspended because, my kid, he hit another kid in the face and that kid had to go to the hospital and I got to call home. My kid at 4 years old bit 5 other kids and I just got a phone call home. I don't even understand how your kids are being suspended when my kids have done some similar things or much worse. And that was the first time it hit me that we live in a society where it doesn't matter if you change where you grew up. It doesn't matter if you change your family and your home status and all of these other things like that, because we cannot change the color of our skins. We live in a society where we still have institutional racism. And tonight I challenge everybody to think about that. What is your role in this? How can you be an advocate for justice? I was on my way here and I found a verse in Isaiah and I want to read this. It's Isaiah and it's chapter 1, verse 17. And some of you may know it. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. And I was reminded of that because so often we might think, not us. And that's what I thought for a long time because I had forgot all those things that happened to me when I was young. And all along, all of these issues on the educational level were going on, but it hadn't affected me. And I realized that sometimes we're put in situations because God knows that when we are in those, that he can use us. And so what I've been trying to do is go everywhere and talk about what can the role be for you. So you might not have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. You might not be able to relate to a child being suspended at such a young age. So what could be your role? Well, we know that we need to continue to have these conversations. We know that we have to start making a push for them to ban preschool suspensions. And we also have to talk more and deeper about institutional racism. Because I do not think that anybody wakes up unapologetically racist in the school system. Maybe some people, but the majority of teachers are good. The majority of them are. But there are a lot of historical things that we cannot control. So a few weeks ago, I was working with an early childhood education center, and I have this activity. I don't have a name for it, but I'll kind of tell you how it goes. I break the teachers up in a group, and I have every teacher take a certain group. So for this group, I'll say African-American boy. For this group, I'll say 65-year-old white woman, and I'll just keep giving them different groups of people. And while I was doing this exercise, there was one teacher in the back crying. And I said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And she said, I don't want to do this. Because next I told them, now I want you to write down everything you've ever heard or been told about this group of people. And when we did that, we had one category that was Black woman. And, some of those things were, having kids with a lot of different daddies and things like that. These are the things that that somewhere we've been taught this, whether it was something we saw in a movie, something we saw in the media. But when it came to Black boys, they saw them as thugs. They saw them as violent. So the first time when my husband and I went to the school and we tried to talk about this, one of the teachers referred to my son as a danger to the classroom and to all of the students. But this is the narrative that is told about Black boys, that they are violent and that they are dangerous. And so that's continually passed down. And this is what happens. If you continue to tell a group of people that they are one thing, they will become that. And I vowed to never allow my kids to become that. So instead of pulling my kids out of the program, as I was instructed, I got calls from other people once this got national attention, please send your kids over here. I thought about, what about for the next child that comes through? What's going to happen if I take my kids out and that parent doesn't have a voice? That parent can't speak up. So I decided to stay there and work with those teachers. And I started to find out a lot of truth, that we don't have near as much training as we need to for early childhood educators. They want the training, but it's not happening. They're paid so poorly that they're working 2 and 3 jobs. So sometimes the smallest things can set them off. Even if they don't deserve that suspension, sometimes they're so exhausted from working that other shift. And so that's where we can come in. That's where we can be advocates. If we know people who are in those educational sectors, if we know those people in power who is sitting on, board of education and things like that, having this conversation about suspensions, specifically preschool suspensions, because there's a theory there with the preschool to prison pipeline. It sounds real catchy, but it's really, really true. And when I think about that, what happens is at a very, very young age, kids are called dangerous and other words like that, like my children. So they build up a tolerance where they don't want to go to school anymore. It's not interesting to them. And so what happens when we don't go to school? Well, we know that there's a lot of idle time to do other things. When you don't have the same education, of course, there's a more likely chance that you're going to live, you're not going to have as much money. You're not going to have as great of a job. So that means you're not going to live in some of the good areas, and violence comes with poverty. And then it's this cycle that continuously repeats, but it starts at just the tender age of 3 and 4. Right now, my boys are down the hallway. They're 6 and 4 now. I haven't gotten any calls that anything's happened, so I don't think they're dangerous. But this is what we have to do. We have to encourage people to watch their words, because those words matter so much. If you take nothing else away from today, let it be our words. I work with teachers all the time, and they'll say, oh, that kid was horrible. Well, maybe that kid didn't have a great day, but let's make sure that we're not communicating with parents that way, and we're not communicating with each other that way. And so when we look at that and we look at how often so many boys are being suspended and kicked out of the early childhood education system, we should not be alarmed by the incarceration rates. We should not be alarmed by the violence that we see all across the country, because it is starting at 3 and 4. And yes, there are some things that we need to do with families, and we need to build them up, and we need to have a lot of opportunities. But we do not leave this room thinking that if you work hard enough, that it's going to all be okay and you can get it, because based on the color of your skin or the zip code that you live in, or the air that you breathe, it determines where you're going to be. There's a study that shows that 89% of us, wherever we grew up, whatever income bracket we grew up in, we will die in that same income bracket. So this is not an opportunity in a country where we can just get wherever we want if we work hard enough. That we have to remember the barriers and the things that are stacked against us. And I see that in my own kids' lives, but I challenge us to be advocates. The same way in Isaiah where it says, seek justice. We cannot be quiet about the things that we know that are going on. We have to tell our friends. We have to challenge people to think beyond what they're normally exposed to. And I know for a long time, even though I was exposed to it as a child, I believed the idea that if I just worked hard enough and gave my kids exactly that great environment, that everything was going to be okay. But I came to share my story with you tonight in hopes that you would see that the issues are deeper, and that there is something we can do, and it can be in our words, encouraging people, even if it's not a person of color. There are a lot of kids being suspended in general across the country. It's become a new thing. We can just kick them out and get rid of them. But guess what's waiting for them on the other side? It's a prison cell. We incarcerate more people than anybody else in the world. But it starts in preschool. Thank you.